Hello, can you hear me okay? Perfect. All right, so I'll just start my softwares, all the softwares that I'll use because it takes a while. And first of all, welcome everyone, and that's from the whole Chaos Group team. My name is Konstantin, for those of you who don't know me, and we'll be together today and we'll talk about V-Ray 3 for 3ds Max, the new version which was released recently. And during the second part of the presentation I will switch to Maya and show you the beta version of V-Ray 3, because I'm sure a lot of you use Maya. So actually, how many Maya users do we have in the room? Can you raise your hands? Oh, plenty. And what about 3ds Max? A lot of those too. Okay, so I'll try to split my presentation 50-50 and show both. Of course, we have a lot of new things and I'll not be able to do it in 1 hour. Okay? And keep in mind that towards the end of the presentation we'll have like 10 minutes and we'll have a draw. One lucky person will win a V-Ray license, and we're giving away 3 t-shirts like mine. Right here you can take a look. So towards the end of the presentation you will fill out a couple of forms. My colleagues will gather them and you will participate in the draw. Okay? Alright, so we'll talk about the new version of V-Ray, and what I wanted to say is that V-Ray, as you well know, V-Ray is a widely quite popular plugin used in a lot of different industries, and we always keep close relationship to our clients, to you guys, and we always base our updates and our new features on your suggestions, needs, and requests. Okay, and that's exactly the case with the new V-Ray version. We have big updates in there that will change everyone's everyday work. And it will change the way in which you do rendering. And we also have many features which are addressing specific needs of specific industries. And in this presentation I'll mix both and try to show you all of that. Okay, and I'll do the whole presentation from an artist standpoint of view, because all those tools quickly became irreplaceable tools in my everyday work, in my tool set. All right? And without further ado, let's jump into 3ds Max and take a look at some examples. So I actually have a question before that. What do you think, what in your opinion is the most important quality of a rendering engine? What do you think? So, speed, yeah, I get that a lot. That's what I expected, and that's the first thing I want to talk about. So with V-Ray 3, our developers went back to the core of the rendering engine, making it faster, and I'll try to prove it right now. So here's an image that I rendered with V-Ray 2.4 in 3ds Max 2013. That's my setup, and I did it before the start of the presentation, not to waste any time. And here in 3ds Max 2014, I'll use V-Ray 3, and I'll render the same exact setup. So the scene was not altered in any way. I'm rendering out of the box. And of course, it will be rendered faster. I can tell you that right away. And the speed boost is thanks to a couple of reasons. First of all, the core ray tracing algorithms are improved in the new version. On top of that, we have added some other optimizations with multiple light sources and some other small things. As you can see, V-Ray is also decreasing the bucket size as the rendering goes on, which again helps and improves the speed. And on top of that, with the new version of V-Ray, we have the use Embry option. So Embry is a set of ray tracing kernels developed at Intel, and with V-Ray 3 you will be able to take advantage of that, speeding up the render process. So this whole thing was rendered in 34 seconds, and if we compare that to V-Ray 2, you can see this one took 1 minute and 17 seconds. So that's twice as fast with the new version of our software. Okay, and of course the speed difference will vary. In some setups, there won't be a big speed difference because the setup is too simple. But in a more sophisticated situation where the light has to do a lot of light bounces, the speed difference will be greater than that. Okay, and what I wanted to do is show you the same test done inside of Maya for all the Maya users. So I rendered the first image using V-Ray 2 for Maya, and after that the second one using V-Ray 3. And I can actually use some new shortcuts added to the frame buffer to show you both. Okay? Right, and now actually, even though V-Ray 3 is faster, we still had to wait for the very last bucket to complete in order to take a look at the image in its entirety. And that's not ideal. It would be great if you can see the whole thing right away and get a feeling of the overall look, feel, and the lighting, okay? And that's why in V-Ray 3 we have added a brand new rendering algorithm called the progressive rendering mode. It is listed as type of an image sampler. Here it is. It's called progressive. And it works similar to RTA. Let me show you what I mean. So I'll delete the image from the frame buffer and re-render. Okay, and the first thing you noticed is that the image pops up right away. It's noisy in the beginning, but that's because the new algorithm is a progressive path tracer. So it will shoot a lot of rays from the camera. You'll start with a noisy image. You'll end up with a perfectly clean result in a couple of seconds. Okay? And the great thing about this one is it runs the production algorithms in the background. So the result that you'll see rendered is exactly a one-to-one replica of what you'll get with the bucket renderer. So there's no difference whatsoever. Everything that's in V-Ray is supported in this engine. On the other hand, the engine is also great because you don't have to worry about a lot of quality settings. You just run it and you end up with a nice looking image. You can also render animations. You just have to specify maximum render time or maximum or set a noise threshold. All right. And of course, for users not experienced in V-Ray, again, that's a perfect solution. Because if before you had to tweak thousands of options to get the optimal render time, now you can just start the progressive render mode, go have a coffee. When you come back, you'll have a perfect solution. And let's say if you have to render a sequence for the night, overnight, you can just calculate the render time, specify a render time in here. In the morning, you have the whole sequence rendered. Okay, and in another example, I want to show you something, again, progressive rendering, but I'll talk a little bit about global illumination. You saw that my previous image popped up right away. That's because I was using brute force as a GI algorithm, okay? But if you still want to take advantage of the optimized global illumination algorithms of V-Ray, you still can using the progressive mode. If I start rendering, you will see the light cache calculated first, the redness map afterwards, and at the end the progressive mode is initiated. So you can still optimize the global illumination engines and work from there. And we have plenty of options in that regard, so you have a lot of GI algorithms to choose from. As you well know, that's what V-Ray is famous for. And you have a lot of options for each engine, which is perfect for an experienced user because he can fine-tweak the algorithms and like to get the most optimized render times. And but on the other hand, for a non-experienced user, that's not ideal because the amount of options can sometimes be overwhelming. And in V-Ray 3, we wanted to have a nice, clean solution for all our users, and that's why we added levels of expertise in the render setup window. So if I change the mode of the redness map from expert to basic, a lot of the options will disappear, and what I'm left with are only the options I use on a daily basis. Of course, you can change the mode for individual rollouts, or you can change the mode globally for the whole render setup window. Okay, and you probably noticed here on the left side that we have a new toolbar, and that's this toolbar is called the V-Ray toolbar. It gives you a lot of nice shortcuts, so you can create light sources from here. You no longer have to go to the command panel of 3ds Max and do it. I can just click on a light source and create it. You can create materials, and you have access to different V-Ray menus, like the light lister, for example. But a new and interesting thing that was added is a complete preset system. So in V-Ray 3, you get this interface, and using it, you can select exterior preset, interior preset, VFX preset, or a studio setup. You can also create custom presets. And after you do so, you can specify GI engines, and you get 2 sliders that can alter between draft quality and production quality, and that's all. With moving just a couple of sliders around, you can get perfect images. And the top slider is responsible for your GI settings, whereas the bottom slider is the anti-aliasing quality. If I don't want to worry about the bottom slider, then I can just choose progressive. Staying in the same interface, I'll click render, and that's what we get. All right, and the quick settings are a great learning tool on their own, because the sliders are actually linked to the V-Ray properties in the render settings. So if I click the settings button and take a look at the subdivisions of the irradiance map, let's say, I can start tweaking the slider and the subdivision value will change. So if you're new to V-Ray, you can basically move the sliders, take a look at how the settings are changing, and work from there. All right? So let's take a look at another example now. And of course, draft rendering is always great, but at one point you have to render a high quality image and a big image as well, just to take a look at the small details in textures or in the geometry. And then oftentimes people will start using the render region in order to select different regions of the image and re-render them. If I want to experiment with the material of this part of the car, I can just use the region. But unfortunately, if I want to work on this material and on this material at the same time, it will be hard because I'll have to render a couple of times. That's why in V-Ray 3 we have added something called the render mask. So what I can do right now is select a couple of geometries, assign a new material to those, and activate the render mask. It has different modes. I will use the selected mode right now and render. And when I do so, V-Ray will re-render only the selected objects in the composition. And to make it much more visual, I will delete the image and render from scratch. That's what V-Ray is recalculating, only the selected parts. And of course, you get a proper alpha, so you can actually use that for compositing, all right? And the render mask has a couple of modes. You can do selected, but you can actually paint custom textures and use them for masking. You can use include, exclude list, and also layers. All right. So let's take a look at what's next. And as you well know, V-Ray is great for creating realistic images or images based on physical reality. That's because of the physical light sources, materials, and global illumination. But sometimes you have to create something stylized, not necessarily realistic. It can be schematic or something else. And in this particular example, what I wanted to do is cut this engine, this cut CID model in half, and view the insides. You might need that for product design animations or adverts. And if you want to do that with the 3ds Max tools, sometimes it's hard, and also it can cause a lot of problems. Also, it's a destructive workflow. And that's why in V-Ray 3, we added something called the V-Ray clipper. And the clipper is a plane. When activated, and I'll have to activate it first. It's a special type of geometry. Everything facing away from the normal of the clipper will be cut out during render time. And you can create effects like that. The cool thing about the clipper is it has some options. So first of all, you can assign material to the clipper and you'll see the material in the cut parts, or you can actually tell the clipper to use the material of the object, and the clipper will do that automatically. The clipper also has an exclude list. So you can select which objects should be cut and which should remain unchanged. Just as an example, I'll enable a couple of clippers. As you can see, multiple clippers will work just fine as well. And that's what we get. And in fact, I can show you a couple of rendered images. So here you can see high quality renders of some experiments that I did with the clipper. And that's achieved with just the click of a button. And the whole thing can be animated as well. All right. Okay, and now I want to say a few words about open standards. And that can be open standards for files, like Alembic caches and so on. It can be textures or whatever. And you all know that we always play good with others. We always try to support all the open standards because they quickly become industry standards, okay? And in V-Ray 3, you have the ability to render open subdivisions, Alembic caches, open color I/O color corrections, p-text displacement, EXR2 files, and I'll talk about those in a second. In this particular example, what I have created is some custom shaders, and in order to create the custom shaders, I used the V-Ray OSL material or the V-Ray OSL texture. So we have a lot of requests. A lot of people want to build custom shaders for V-Ray for their specific needs, and we decided the open shading language is the way to go. And here for the shaders of those figures, I have used the V-Ray OSL texture, and I'll just render. I created sort of a madcap shader from ZBrush, let's say, and that's the effect you can get. But we basically support everything that's possible with the OSL shader, so you can create whatever you need. And talking about materials, I want to show you a new material introduced in the new version. So you know that V-Ray is a plugin available for a big number of base 3D applications. So you have it in Max, you have it in Maya, in SketchUp, in Rhino, and other applications in Blender. And we wanted to give you the ability or give you a way to transfer data in between the different applications. For example, you might want to transfer materials. And that's why in V-Ray 3 we have a new material called the VR mat. Let's open an example of that. It's this one. And the VR mat is a universal shader that will let you save shaders in a specific file format, and then the shaders can be transferred to any other application that supports V-Ray. Or you can import them back in 3ds Max if you want to. So here I'll just render to show you what the image looks like. Okay, so that's what my image looks like, and what I want to do right now is export some materials from this one and import them in Maya in a similar setup. I can use the VR mat by activating or opening the VR mat converter. This will bring up an interface, and here you can select individual materials from the scene, export them as VR mat files, or you can say, well, I want to export all the materials from the scene to VR mats. So you will select this option, create a folder, and it's done. I basically exported all the materials to VR mats. Here they are. In the folder with the VR mats, I'll get the subfolders for each individual material, and in the subfolder you have a VR mat file, this one, and you also have all the necessary textures, and the dynamic link will be established between both, so you don't have to worry about texture paths or anything like that. And right now, if I go in Maya, load a similar setup, here it is. You will see that I'm missing some of the materials. Some of the materials are not here. I'll actually import them from the VRMAT files in a second. And that's the progressive mode in Maya. What I want to do is select or import the material for the walls. So let's do it real quick. I'll create a VRMAT loader, and I will create 2 of those. Load the files. So that's the first one, and here's the second one. Where is it? All right, so I have 2 materials. You can even see the materials in the Maya swatches, and then I can just apply the materials. So this is the white one, and this is the yellow one. And just with a couple of clicks, I was able to transfer materials from 3ds Max to Maya. It's so simple. And if that's not enough, we're building a huge library of materials, VR materials. Online, you'll be able to go to that library, download materials which are set up for you, and use them in your projects. Of course, after the material is loaded, we actually give you the ability to edit the material using a specific editor. So I can select this material, change the color, change the reflectivity. It will work just fine. And I can save it on the hard drive again. And at this point, this material can go to SketchUp, it can go to Rhino, and it will appear exactly the same way. All right, and I wanted to show you something else. I'll go back to the open standards that I was talking about earlier. In V-Ray 3, you can actually export EXR2 files. So before, most of the people were using multi-channel EXRs. That's a great file format because it will save all the render elements in a single file, which you can then import in Nuke and use. And with V-Ray 3, you can actually export all the individual channels and the deep data for all the pixels on top of that. And I will use Nuke to show you that. I guess it's this one. And I'll use the personal learning edition. You'll see some colorful spots on top of my image. Yeah. All right. So the image you're looking at here looks like the image you saw in Maya, but actually that's a deep point data generated by V-Ray. And in fact, I can rotate the camera inside of Nuke and take a look at the deep point data. And you can imagine what kind of possibilities lie in front of you inside of Nuke for compositing, I mean. So that's the point cloud. If I go back to my comp, oopsie. If I go back to my comp, the first thing you can do is, of course, color corrections in depth. And that's what I did with the help of the color corrections. So you can basically add a tint to all the pixels close to the camera and add a different tint to pixels further away from the camera. You can also add images into the composition. So let's say I can move this green screen closer to the camera or further away. And in my next example, I actually used the same exact approach to add those smokes, the smoke simulations created with Phoenix FD. And you can also use the deep data to add a depth field to the composition. You get that for free. And at any point, you can convert the deep image to a regular image and continue on with your regular compositing. All right, and now I will load my first setup again with the shaman, and I'll render it in Maya as it is. Oops, actually Actually have the wrong one, sorry for that. So again, I will use the progressive rendering mode, and I want to show you something really cool. So there's the progressive rendering in Maya. And now what I wanted to do with this one is I wanted to add a blue backlight, like a blue rim light for the background objects in my composition. And oftentimes in the VFX environment you have to do localized effects like that. So in order to achieve it, I added this geometry in the background, and this one will be reflected by my environment objects. So let's look through the camera again and re-render. As you can see, I'm using production example scene, so I'm not using simplified examples. I try to show you the actual speed and performance. And with this one, I get exactly the effect I want. I get the rim light, and it's being reflected, the plane is reflected nicely. But unfortunately, I can also see the reflection on the glass part of the ground. I don't want to see that. Before, it would have been hard with V-Ray to remove that connection, that reflection connection. But with V-Ray 3, it's quite simple. So I just have to tell V-Ray, well, don't reflect the background plane onto the glass piece, and that's all. So now we can still see the reflections in the background, but the blue geometry is not reflected by the glass piece of the ground plane. All right, and in this image, I wanted to show you something else. You well know that rendering an image is not the final stage of a project. So most often than not, you will continue with the post-production stages in another application. And it would be great if you can actually see all the color corrections and all the color grading inside of the V-Ray frame buffer, even while you are rendering, because you'll get an idea what the image will look like at the very end. And in fact, you can do it by loading LUT color corrections or ICIO, Open Color IO color corrections exported from Nuke or whatever application you use. And you can load them in the V-Ray frame buffer, and you can preview your image with the final color grading. Also, in V-Ray 3, we decided to extend the color correction capabilities of the V-Ray frame buffer itself. And if I load the controls, you'll see a lot more going on. So now I can do color corrections in the V-Ray frame buffer based on the different RG and B channels. I can do color correction for the shadows, midtones, or the highlights individually, which is actually quite cool. You can also do hue color corrections, or I can change the saturation if I want to. All those parameters can be saved in files, all the tweaks, and you can load them afterwards. Or you can save global presets. The global preset will save all the options in there. Of course, we have kept all the old controls, so you can still do curve color corrections or levels. On top of that, here in the frame buffer, you can see the V-Ray lens effects. And the lens effects are a post effect. So they're not actual rendered lens effects, bloom and glare. They're added to the already rendered image. This means that I can even load an image from my history and add some cool lens effects to it. Okay? So let me enable the effect. I'll enable the bloom and the glare effect. And it's as simple as that. And then I can start playing with the weight. The image will update automatically. Of course, you can also limit the effect to certain light intensities, to specific objects, or based on a material. In that particular case, I'm limiting the effect only to the light tubes in the background. All right? So that's also quite cool. I know that a lot of people want to finalize their projects in the frame buffer itself. Now they have a lot more tools to play with. All right, and now I want to talk a little bit about character rendering, because I know that a lot of you do a lot of character rendering, and in that whole process, in all the workflows, there are many challenges. With V-Ray 3, we are addressing all those challenges. I'll start by talking about displacement. So V-Ray is famous for rendering displacements quickly in the most memory efficient way possible. And we also supported all sorts of displacements. You could render an 8-bit displacement, 32-bit displacement with negative values, and also vector displacement. But since the technology is evolving, in V-Ray 3 we support all the new modes of the vector displacement. So we can use PTEX textures for displacement, and you can also do object space deformations. And that's what I'll use in this example. So here I have a relatively simple geometry. This one, and when I enable the displacement for it, I'm not changing the geometry in any way. It will be generated during render time. That's what I get. So the object space vector displacements are quite a powerful tool. Let's say you want to animate that, you can certainly do it. So here's an example. I just changed the displacement amount, and I was able to create that animation. It's quite nice. And in another test of mine, I created this one from this one. And you saw that it's rendered in seconds. So the image was noisy for like a split second, and afterwards it was perfectly clean. Another thing when it comes to character rendering is, of course, hair rendering. And let's see, I'll open this one. And V-Ray was quite good at hair rendering because it had the V-Ray hair shader. So that's a great material that lets you create nice looking hair easily because it has a lot of layers and a big amount of control. In V-Ray 3 we decided to improve the render speed. So the hair is rendered much faster. And I'll actually show you some examples in the frame buffer right away. This was again rendered before the presentation. So here I rendered this one using V-Ray 2. It took 2 minutes and 12 seconds. After that I re-rendered the same thing with V-Ray 3, and I was able to do it in 1 minute and 7 seconds, so it's twice as fast. And of course the speed up is true for rendering Maya hair, but you can also use other plugins like Yeti, or if you're in 3ds Max you can use Hair Farm or Natrix, whatever you like. The speed optimization is in there. Because we work in close relationship to all the plugin developers, and we're able to optimize our hair rendering algorithms for all the plugins at the same time. Another cool thing about the hair is that you can now export the hair as Alembic cache and render it this way. All right. Another crucial part of character rendering is, of course, skin shading. And you're already familiar, I'm sure, with the V-Ray Fast SSS 2 material. And that's exactly the material I'm using at the moment. But unfortunately, it is based on a prepass. So there's a calculation before the rendering starts, and after that, the samples are used for the subsurface effect. And because of that, sometimes you miss some small details of the geometry, and it will be hard for you to create the effect you're after. In that particular case, I wanted to have a nice backlight or light scattered for the ear of my character, but because of the prepass, I'm losing all the details here. That's why in V-Ray 3 we have updated the material, and now it has a new mode. This new mode is called Ray Traced. And it's based entirely on brute force algorithms. It will capture all the small details, and it's extremely precise. You don't have to tweak any options. You get perfect results out of the box. Okay, and I wanted to show you the comparison between the two images. So here's the image with the prepass-based material. And where is the other one? Okay, so that's with the ray traced. I think it's quite obvious. I wanted to compare both, but it will not happen. All right. And because of that change, now the new material or the new mode of the material can be rendered in real time. And this means that if I start V-Ray RT, we will be able to see the effect and tweak it interactively. So here we go. You have subsurface scattering in real time. So I can move the camera, change material property, everything will update automatically. Okay, but on top of that, we wanted to add yet another tool for the job. And we added a brand new material called the V-Ray skin. If I assign it to my character, I'll need to find it. Here it is, V-Ray skin. I'll be able to take a look at its properties. The unique thing about this material is that it has multiple layers. So you have a layer for shallow scattering, a layer for medium scattering, and a deep layer. So all those layers can be textured. You have a radius and a mount to play around with. Most often than not, you want to specify a small value for the shallow layer, a big value for the deep layer, and the middle scattering layer will go somewhere in the middle. I will usually use the deep scattering layer for vein, and I'll plug vein textures in there. I'll use the shallow layer for my actual skin texture, and the medium layer can be used for muscle or fat tissue or really shallow veins. All right. And I've seen a lot of people use the old V-Ray Fast SSS material together with the V-Ray blend material in order to add multiple reflection layers one on top of the other. You don't have to do it with the skin material because the skin material has multiple reflection layers which you can activate if you have to. All right. Oops, sorry for that. So I have like 20 softwares running at the same time, and I'm also using a beta version, so those things happen. And I was showing you V-Ray RT running on the CPU, and I want to add something to that. In the new version of V-Ray, the RT running on the CPU uses the production algorithms. So actually the new RT supports 100% of all the features which are available in V-Ray, and the result rendered by RT will be one-to-one replica to what you'll get with the production engine. All the effects that you have in the production example are supported, like V-Ray displacement, proxy geometries, those are proxies in the background, hair, skin, volumetrics, everything can be rendered in real time. And if that's not enough, I can actually start RT and use it as a viewport rendering engine. So you don't even have to use the V-Ray frame buffer. So now it will load all the textures, all the assets for my composition, and you'll be able to see the whole image rendered in the viewport. And it is actually interactive. So I can move the camera around, I can select different objects, move them around, and that's with all the effects you have in a production scene. Okay? So why would you switch to rendering in the frame buffer at all? Well, there is a reason. In the new version of V-Ray, we support render elements in real time. So you can have all the render elements and do proper compositing inside of Nuke. And of course, the render elements are also supported on the GPU, which was a big step in the right direction for us, because now you can render production projects on the GPU of your computer. So here's another example. Of course, I can start rendering in the viewport right away, and after that I'll show you the render elements. And this specific asset is actually part of an award-winning short movie called Archetype. So this is an asset from an actual film, and I'm able to render that during the presentation, which is quite impressive. So here it goes. That's rendered on the GPU. And if I render it in the frame buffer, we'll be able to take a look at the render elements. Okay, that's our RGB pass. Here's, let's say, Z-depth, extra texture, V-Ray dirty supported, masks, diffuse, global illumination, all the different render passes are supported, even on the GPU, and that's interactive. I can rotate the camera, take a look at the different passes. On top of that, there's a V-Ray specific render element called the light select, which will let you extract the contribution of individual lights of your setup and will save it in a separate layer. And this one also works in real time on the GPU. So there's my key light, my rim light, my low lights, the small lights, and when I combine all of those together inside of Nuke, I will get an exact replica of my RGB pass. So let me show you that. So here I rendered another composition, and this one was divided into multiple different render elements. That's what it looks like. And I can actually enable or disable all the individual lights in the set. And I can tweak them afterwards in Nuke without re-rendering at all. And if I compare the image created from the light selects to the original beauty pass, and I have to connect all of them, I guess, it will be exactly the same. So there's no difference whatsoever. They work exactly as expected, all right? And I think we are running out of time. If you're interested in GPU rendering and all of that, we have a presentation starting at 2 o'clock, and we'll talk about this really cool project called Construct. It was rendered, it's the first short film rendered entirely on the GPUs. And I'll be able to show you some things in practice during that second presentation as well. And what I wanted to say is that I just want to find some images first. Is that we have a brand new website as well, because we wanted to change the whole user experience with this new version of V-Ray. And here you can see a couple of screenshots of the website. It's gorgeous. We have a lot of image examples created by our clients. So here's an example of the skin material. It's quite a cool image. And also you have all the new features listed. If you go online and check them out, we have videos and a lot of other information regarding all those features. All right? These are the videos, for example. We have a brand new help documentation, which is much more detailed, much more visual than the previous one. And we have a new installer as well. I just wanted to share that with you. It will take care of everything, and it's bulletproof at this point. All right. Yeah. So I think that were most of the things I wanted to show you. We are also at the booth at the marketplace. If you have questions or if you want to see something else, just stop by. I'll be able to show you everything. So I think that's all. And we'll have a small Q&A session. And I actually guessed your first question. What kind of workstation do you use? These are the specs of my workstation. It was provided to us by our partners from Fujitsu. So that's you can read all the data and get familiar with it. And during the Q&A, you can actually fill out the forms and participate in the draw. My colleagues will gather all the paper pieces. All right? So thanks for your attention.